The air inside the underground boardroom was thick enough to choke on. 40 feet below Obsidian City's glittering skyline, sealed behind reinforced doors that could survive a detonation, 12 of the oldest and most dangerous beings in the known world sat in silence and waited for two alphas to stop trying to kill each other with their eyes. Elena Voss did not blink. She sat at the left end of the Obsidian conference table, appropriate, she had always thought, that the city named itself after the sharpest cutting stone in nature. With her hands folded on the surface and her green eyes fixed on the man seated directly across from her, like a declaration of war. The overhead lights carved shadows beneath his cheekbones and made his dark eyes look like two holes punched through something dangerous. Dante Crow, 6 feet 4 inches of leashed violence, stuffed into a black tailored suit that probably cost more than her first office building. His jaw was tight enough to crack granite. The knuckles of his right hand, resting flat on the table, were still healing from the last time he had put them through one of her men. She had put 2 of his in the hospital that same week. They were even. The blood from the most recent skirmish, a territorial dispute that had consumed Westbridge District for 3 brutal days, was still fresh enough that she could smell it on both of them. Her pack had held the line. His pack had refused to retreat. 11 wolves, total, had paid for the stubbornness of their alphas. Elena kept the grief locked in a box behind her ribs, where it could not touch her expression. Grief was a luxury she had not been able to afford since she took the Southside mantle at 22. Elder Corvus set the document on the table, and the sound it made was like a gavel. The old man had the kind of stillness that came from outliving centuries of exactly this kind of meeting. His silver hair was swept back from a face that held no warmth, only patience and the absolute certainty of someone who had watched empires burn because 2 wolves decided territory mattered more than survival. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Obsidian City is hemorrhaging, he said. 300 casualties in 18 months. 4 neutral districts destabilized. The human authorities are asking questions our network cannot suppress indefinitely. He let that land. The Elder Council has deliberated. We have reached a unanimous decision. Elena kept her eyes on Dante. Dante kept his on her. Neither of them looked at the document, because looking at it would mean acknowledging that someone else in this room held power over them, and neither of them was built for that. Elder Corvus tapped the first page. A binding cohabitation agreement. 6 months. You will legally marry, you will share a single residence, and you will publicly present a unified front to both your pacts and to the business communities you operate within. All territorial aggression will cease immediately. All pack assets will be frozen from offensive deployment. He paused. The alternative is straightforward. The Council will authorize the extinction of both your bloodlines. Every wolf you lead, every lieutenant, soldier, and pup operating under either banner. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Elena felt the cold slide down her spine, but she did not let it reach her face. She heard Dante exhale through his nose, slow and controlled, and she knew without looking that he had gone perfectly still the way he always did when he was calculating rather than reacting. She had studied him long enough to read the difference. Right now, he was running the same numbers she was, and they were both arriving at the same answer, and they both hated it with every molecule they were made of. She unfolded her hands. 6 months, she said. Her voice came out flat and precise, the same voice she used in acquisition meetings when she was about to dismantle someone's company. Legally binding. Cohabitation. Correct, Corvus said. She looked at Dante then. He was already looking at her. His expression was the one she called his execution face, empty of everything except cold, total focus. It was the face he wore when he had already decided to do something and was simply waiting for the logistics to align. You'll be living with me, he said. The low register of his voice carried across the table like a blade laid flat against skin. Not a threat yet. A fact, stated in the tone of someone who intended it to become a threat the moment they were alone. That's yet to be determined, she replied. Corvus slid a pen across the table toward her, another toward him. Blood pact, witnessed by the full council. Non-negotiable terms. Breach of contract results in the immediate execution clause without appeal. Alana stared at the pen. She thought about the 11 wolves. She thought about the ones still breathing. She thought about the 300 casualties Corvus had mentioned and knew the number would double before winter if she walked out of this room and resumed business as usual. She had not climbed out of nothing and clawed her way to Alpha to watch her people die for a war she had not started. She picked up the pen. She pressed her teeth to her index finger and bit down until blood welled bright and sharp, and then she signed her name across the bottom of the pact in a signature that looked exactly like her boardroom signature, except written in red. She dropped the pen, pressed her bleeding finger against her palm, and looked up. Dante was watching her hand. The look on his face was unreadable in a way that was different from his usual blankness. Something moved through it and was gone before she could catalog it. Then he picked up his own pen, bit his finger with the casual brutality of someone who had done far worse to themselves, and signed without hesitation. He capped the pen, set it down, and met her eyes. The look he gave her should have come with a warning. It promised her something she was fairly certain was not going to feel like kindness. The council witnessed the signatures. The document was sealed. Someone produced bandages, which Elena ignored. She pulled on her suit jacket, gathered her phone and her keys, and walked out of the boardroom with her spine straight and her heels silent on the polished concrete floor. The elevator ride down to the underground parking level was 45 seconds of herself, her reflection, and the controlled fury she allowed herself to feel only when no one was watching. 6 months. She would survive 6 months of anything. She had survived worse. She smoothed the front of her jacket, watched the floor number descend, and stepped out into the dim blue-gray light of the garage. Her car was where she had left it, isolated at the far end of the lot the way she always parked. Habit, tactical, both. She had her keys in her hand and 2 steps of distance left between her and the door when she felt him. It was not a sound. It was a shift in the air, a change in atmospheric pressure, the way a storm announces itself before the clouds arrive. She turned her head, and there he was, stepping out of the shadow between 2 concrete pillars with the unhurried certainty of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. Dante Crow walked until there was almost no space left between her and the car, and then he stopped, and the geometry of the situation resolved itself into something Elena recognized immediately and refused to show any reaction to. Cornered. He was 6'4" and broader than her field of vision wanted to accommodate at this distance, and the parking structure made him larger somehow. The low ceiling and the dim industrial lights stripping away the context of the boardroom and leaving only the fact of him. She turned to face him fully. She did not step back. "Move," she said. He did not move. He leaned forward instead, one hand coming up to rest flat on the roof of her car just above her shoulder. And he brought his face down to a level where she could see every precise line of his features in the low light, the hard cut of his jaw, the dark eyes that were watching her with an intensity that most people would have found alarming. "Let me be very clear with you, Elena." His voice had dropped to something quieter than a growl and more dangerous for it. "For the next 6 months, you will conduct yourself with the level of cooperation that pact requires. You will not embarrass my name. You will not run operations against my interests from inside my residence. You will behave." The word landed like a hand around her throat, and she felt her chin come up in direct response to it. "Behave," she repeated. The smile she gave him did not reach her eyes. Nothing she produced in moments like this ever reached her eyes. Interesting choice of word for a man who just had 11 of his people carried out in body bags because he refused to hold a boundary. Something flicked across his face. She filed it away. "The pact is signed," he said. "You belong in my house for 6 months. That is law now. What happens inside those walls is between us." He held her gaze, and the threat in it was immaculate, specific, and entirely personal. "Don't test me." She stepped closer instead of back, tipping her chin up to close the last inch of distance between her face and his, and let him see every ounce of contempt and cold confidence she possessed. 6 months, she said quietly, And then I am going to dismantle every square foot of territory you own piece by piece, and I am going to enjoy it." She turned, unlocked her car, and got in. The engine turned over like a growl. Behind her, pressed against the concrete pillar now, out of the sightline of her rearview mirror, Dante Crow stood completely still with his right hand buried in his jacket pocket. His fingers were shaking, not from rage, not from the cold, from the scent of her perfume, which had hit him the moment he stepped into her space and had not let go, and which was currently doing things to his chest that he had spent 4 years refusing to name. His jaw was locked. His eyes were fixed on the exit where her taillights had just disappeared. He stood there long after the sound of her engine faded, in the dark and the silence, and breathed through it the way a man breathes through pain he knows is not going to stop. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of the Obsidian Meridian Tower, which was neutral territory by Elder Council decree, and, therefore, belonged to neither of them, which meant both of them immediately began treating it like a battlefield the moment the elevator doors opened on the 49th floor. Alana walked in first because the driver had opened her door first, and she had used the 40-second ride-up to calculate that if she established presence in the primary space before he did, she would hold the psychological advantage for the remainder of the evening. She set her carry case down on the left side of the massive kitchen island, claimed the left corridor with her eyes in approximately 2 seconds, and turned to find Dante already standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows with his jacket over his arm, surveying the city like he was already deciding which parts of it were his. "I'll take the east wing," she said. "I already decided I want the east wing," he said, without turning from the window. "You were looking at the window. I was looking at the layout. I was looking at the window and doing both." He finally turned. "East wing." She studied him for 3 seconds. "Fine. I'll take the east wing. You can have the west." The look on his face told her that he understood exactly what she had done. He had wanted the east wing because she wanted it, and now she had reversed the logic and left him holding a position he didn't actually care about. The muscle in his jaw flexed once. "West wing," he said. "Excellent decision." She picked up her carry case and walked down the east corridor. They divided the penthouse along a line that ran directly through the center of the living space, marked initially by the placement of Elena's leather portfolio on the left edge of the kitchen island and Dante's watch on the right edge of the coffee table. Within 24 hours, the boundary had become significantly more elaborate. A row of Elena's design books ran parallel to the couch spine like a low wall. Dante's jacket, perpetually draped over the back of the right armchair, served as territorial flag. Neither of them acknowledged what they were doing out loud, because acknowledging it would have required one of them to find it funny. And they had a mutual, unspoken agreement that finding anything about this situation funny was a form of surrender. The espresso machine was a problem. It was a single unit, top of the line, positioned at the center of the kitchen counter, which was precisely on the territorial boundary. And they both apparently required a specific quantity of espresso to function before 9 in the morning, which meant they both appeared in the kitchen at roughly the same hour, and then stood on opposite sides of the island in expensive sleepwear, staring at it like it was the last resource on Earth. On day 3, Elena arrived to find him already at the machine, his back to her, in dark drawstring trousers and nothing else, and she spent exactly 2 seconds registering the unfair topography of his back before she crossed to the refrigerator without a word and waited. He made his espresso. He left. She made hers. On day 4, she set her alarm 12 minutes earlier. On day 5, she found him already there again. She was fairly certain he had also set his alarm earlier. She went back to her room, adjusted her alarm by another 15 minutes, returned, and made her espresso in total, victorious silence, while he stood in the doorway watching her with the expression of a man making very specific future plans. They had been in the penthouse for 9 days when the gala arrived. The Meridian Charity Gala was the single most photographed social event on Obsidian City's calendar, and their appearance together, announced via a carefully worded joint press release, that their respective PR teams had apparently nearly come to blows over the wording of, had produced a level of market speculation that required them to perform a convincing marriage with exactly zero rehearsal and maximum personal resentment. Elena's stylist came at 4. By 7, she was standing in front of the floor-length mirror in the East Wing, in a gown the color of deep emerald that moved with her like water and left approximately nothing about her figure to imagination, while somehow managing to look like serious money rather than anything else. She emerged into the main living space and found Dante already there. He was in a black tuxedo with no tie, the collar open one button, and he looked like something carved specifically to ruin a woman's composure, which she noted clinically, the way she noted quarterly earnings reports, as a fact with implications she would manage accordingly. He looked at her when she walked in, and she watched the way his expression did and did not change simultaneously, something going very still behind his eyes, while the rest of his face maintained its usual controlled blankness. "You look acceptable," he said. "You look like you're trying," she replied. The car was waiting. The gala was held in the Grand Meridian Hall, 7 stories of glass and old money, and they arrived to a press corridor that produced enough camera flash to qualify as a weather event. Alana felt his hand settle at the small of her back the moment they stepped out of the car, and she kept her smile immaculate and her elbow slightly angled to make the contact feel deliberate rather than possessive. Inside, they circulated. Alana shook hands, accepted champagne, laughed at things that were mildly amusing with the warmth of someone who found them genuinely hilarious. Dante stood beside her and played the role of devoted, slightly dangerous husband with an ease that unsettled her more than the hostility did. His hand moving from her back to her waist to her shoulder with proprietary fluency, and the assembled room of Obsidian City's elite watched them with the fascinated attention of people who had been reading about their rivalry for 18 months and were now watching the narrative collapse in real time. They were seated at the head table for the dinner service, and Dante turned toward her to say something charming to the couple on his left, and in the process brought his mouth very close to her ear. "Stop touching my arm," he said, through a smile that would have photographed beautifully. "You look like you're trying to control me." "I am trying to control you," she said, and lifted her champagne flute with a radiant expression. "That is the whole point. Smile." He smiled. It was the most threatening smile she had ever seen produced in formal wear. Under the table, his hand found her knee and rested there with calm, deliberate heaviness, and she felt the warmth of it through the fabric and kept her own expression effortlessly serene, while every nerve in that radius lit up with an alarm she absolutely refused to act on. She moved her heel onto the top of his left shoe and applied weight. His smile did not waver. He pressed his fingers slightly harder against her knee. She increased the pressure. He picked up his wine glass with his free hand, took a calm sip, and leaned back toward her ear. "You're going to scratch the leather," he said. "I know," she said sweetly. By the time the speeches concluded, she was fairly certain they had each consumed 2 glasses of champagne more than was strategically advisable, which she attributed to the fact that performing happiness required a specific kind of sustained effort that depleted resources she would normally allocate to threat assessment. Dante's hand at her waist on the exit walk was less calculated than the entrance had been. She noticed that, too. The private elevator to the penthouse was small enough that the space between them was not really a space at all, and they were barely through the doors before the argument reignited from wherever it had been banked all evening like coals under ash. "You undermined me with the Harwick account," she said. "You didn't have the Harwick account. You had a conversation. I had a signed letter of intent, which is not a contract." He turned toward her fully in the enclosed space, and the elevator was approximately the size of a very expensive coffin, which I would have explained to you if you had bothered to verify the terms before announcing it to your board. Don't explain my own industry to me. She stepped forward without thinking, or perhaps with thinking she was choosing not to examine in real time. "You want me to behave, but you can't keep your hands out of my business for 48 hours. Your business was in my district. Your district is a line you drew on a map." He moved. She did not fully process the sequence of events between him moving and her back meeting the elevator wall, only that it happened with a velocity that robbed her of the next 2 words she had been forming. And then his hands were on either side of her head, and his face was 3 inches from hers, and the space between them was made entirely of the last 4 years of everything neither of them had said. He kissed her. It was not soft. It was not exploratory. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding something back until holding it became structurally impossible, hard and immediate and deep. And she kissed him back with the same fury she brought to everything because it was the only setting she had, and because the warmth of his hands against the wall beside her face was short-circuiting something in her chest she had no name for yet. The elevator doors opened. They separated like a detonation in reverse, both stepping back, both breathing harder than the previous 60 seconds should have warranted, both looking at a point in the middle distance rather than at each other. "That was the champagne," she said. "Obviously," he said. He walked to the west wing. She walked to the east wing. The penthouse was absolutely silent. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her fingertips to her mouth for exactly 3 seconds before she dropped her hand, set her jaw, and went to wash off her makeup with the efficient precision of someone who had not just had the entire geometry of a 4-year war rearranged in 45 seconds. Down the west corridor, Dante stood at his window with one hand braced on the glass and looked out at the city lights and said nothing to no one, because there was nothing to say that the shape of the next 5.5 months would not say for him. The yacht was called the Obsidian Meridian, naturally, because the Elder Council had a flair for symbolism and no apparent sense of irony, and it cut through the dark water of the Ventura Straits like a blade laid flat against black silk. The charter had been arranged as a public relations event. Photographs of the 2 rival alphas at ease on the water, unified and civilized and thoroughly non-threatening, to be distributed to the financial press before Monday's market open. Elena had spent the first 40 minutes of the voyage, standing at the stern rail in a slate blue evening gown, holding a glass of mineral water, watching the city lights of Obsidian's coastline shrink behind them, and calculating exactly how many more events like this the pact was going to require. Dante had spent the same 40 minutes at the opposite rail, which told her he was doing the same math and arriving at the same grim conclusions. They had not discussed the elevator. They had not discussed it the morning after, or the 3 mornings since, and the silence on the subject had achieved a kind of critical mass that made the air between them feel pressurized in a way that had nothing to do with hostility and everything to do with the far more complicated problem of what hostility was apparently covering. Elena was a precise and honest internal analyst when it came to every subject except this one. And she had decided by the second morning that not examining the elevator was simply the most operationally efficient choice available. She heard the first sound at the 43rd minute. It was small. A soft, mechanical click from somewhere below the waterline that did not belong to the rhythm of the yacht's engine, and she registered it the way she registered all anomalous data, immediately, without deciding to. She set her glass down on the rail. Across the deck, she saw Dante's posture change at exactly the same moment. His head lifting a 1/4 inch, body going still in the way it went still when he was reading a room for threats rather than exits. Their eyes met. The first mercenary came over the portside rail 30 seconds later. They came in fast and coordinated, 8 of them in tactical gear with suppressed weapons and the practiced efficiency of professionals who had done this before on vessels where no one survived to describe the method. The deck lights caught the black polymer of their rifles, and the crew member nearest the bow went down before he could shout. And Alana had already moved by the time the second mercenary cleared the rail. Her hand went to her thigh. The holster was there because she was always armed. Because she had been alpha long enough to know that the moments you were most visible were the moments you were most exposed. And the silver blade came free of its sheath in a single motion as she stepped out of her heels and cut the dress's lower panel with one controlled slash so it would not tangle her legs. The fabric tore away in a clean line. She was moving before it hit the deck. The mercenary in front of her had a rifle and approximately 3 inches of height advantage. And she went under his first sweep and drove the blade into the junction of his body armor's shoulder strap with enough force to drop him. She took his sidearm on the way down, checked the load in half a second, and came up to find Dante had crossed the deck in the time it had taken her to handle one man. He hit the gunman nearest the navigation door with the kind of force that removed the encounter from the category of fight and placed it firmly in the category of structural failure. The rifle went one direction, the man went another. Dante caught the weapon before it fully completed its arc, reversed it, and put it to use with the fluid economy of someone who had grown up in violence and made his peace with it a long time ago. His tuxedo jacket was gone, the white shirt beneath it pulling across his shoulders as he moved, and Alana registered in some highly compartmentalized part of her awareness that the two of them had naturally positioned themselves back to back without a single word exchanged. She did not question it. She faced her sector. He faced his. They worked through the deck in less than 4 minutes. It was not clean. Nothing done at speed in the dark on a moving vessel is clean, but it was decisive. Elana took a gash across her left forearm from a combat knife she did not fully clear in time, and felt it as information rather than pain, cataloging it and continuing. Dante absorbed a strike to his ribs that would have broken something in a smaller man and used the momentum of it to put his attacker through the deck seating. When the last mercenary went overboard, the yacht's deck was theirs, and the night was very quiet except for the engine and the water, and both of them breathing. Elana turned. Dante turned at the same moment. They stood facing each other in the wreckage of what had been a catered press event, her dress torn and his shirt untucked, and both of them holding weapons that belonged to people who were no longer standing. She saw the sniper's laser a half-second before the shot. It came from the portside service tender, a small boat running dark with a shooter positioned at the bow, and the red dot crossed the deck and settled on the center of her chest. And she had already begun the wrong calculation, whether she could move fast enough, when Dante crossed the remaining distance between them and turned his back to the tender. The shot hit him in the right shoulder. The impact drove him forward into her, and she caught him with both arms, which was an instinct she did not have time to interrogate, and they went down together to the deck, and she rolled him, putting her body between him and the tender's sightline. Her stolen sidearm was up in the same motion, and she put 2 shots into the tender's engine housing, and the third into the fuel line on pure inference, and the small boat's stern lit orange against the black water. The shooter went into the straits. Alana stayed where she was for exactly 3 seconds, weapon raised, scanning the water. Then she looked down at Dante. He was sitting up against the deck rail with one hand pressed to his shoulder, and the expression of a man who found the situation annoying rather than alarming, which told her the damage was manageable and that he was not going into shock, and she felt something unclench in her chest that she categorized as reasonable concern for a pact-bound cohabitant. "Yacht has a medical bay," she said. "I know where the medical bay is," he said. "Then get up." She got him to the medical bay, which was better equipped than its discreet location behind the galley suggested, and she sat him on the examination table and did not consider whether she was qualified for what came next, beyond the fact that she had been dressing her own wounds and her pack's wounds since she was 19 years old, and she was not going to stand there while he bled on the upholstery. She found the kit, found the light, and said, "Shirt." He began unbuttoning it left-handed, which was slow. She moved his hand aside and did it herself with the brisk efficiency of someone performing a task, rather than touching a person, starting from the collar and working down. The shirt parted. She peeled it back from the wound and began assessing, because there was a great deal of blood, and she needed to know what was underneath it before she could do anything useful. Her hand stilled, resting against his sternum on a fine silver chain, half obscured by blood and the shadow of the medical bay light, was a pendant she had not seen in 4 years. She would have known it in total darkness. The small silver crest was the Southside pact seal, her pact seal, rendered in detail she had commissioned herself at 23, unique in its exact configuration of the wolf profile and the 3 stars above its shoulder. She had worn it into a border skirmish in the old Docklands territory, and had been certain she lost it in the chaos of the retreat. She had looked for it afterward, the way you look for something after a loss, knowing it was gone, and eventually she had stopped looking. It was here. It was resting against his skin, warm from his body, on a chain that had been there long enough to show minor wear at the clasp. Elena did not move. She stared at it for a span of time she could not have measured, and her mind ran the logic of it silently and with absolute precision, the way her mind ran everything. He had been at the Docklands skirmish, not on her side, on the opposite side of the boundary line, the same encounter that had cost them both people and produced nothing. He had found this in the aftermath. He had kept it. He had kept it not as a trophy, not as intelligence, but on a chain against his skin, for 4 years, through every boardroom confrontation and territorial war and evening in the penthouse where they had stood 6 feet apart, drinking espresso in hostile silence. She raised her eyes slowly to his face. He was watching her, not with the execution face, and not with the boardroom blankness. He was watching her the way he had watched her in the garage with his hand hidden in his pocket, the way she had seen something move across his face in the council chamber before he locked it down, and now there was nowhere to lock it because she was holding the evidence against her palm and the chain was still warm. He said nothing. He held her gaze and let her see what was there, for the first time, without the architecture of his hostility in front of it. She closed her fingers carefully around the pendant and breathed. Then she opened her hand, laid the pendant back against his chest, and reached for the antiseptic with hands that were almost completely steady. She had questions. She had a great many of them, and she was going to ask every single one. But first, she was going to stop his bleeding, because that was the order of operations, and because she needed 60 seconds with her eyes on her work and away from his face, while she dismantled and rebuilt every assumption she had been operating on for the last 4 years. She worked in silence for 2 full minutes, which was approximately how long it took her to establish that the bullet had passed clean through the outer muscle without touching bone, and that the bleeding, while dramatic, was controllable. She packed the wound with practiced hands and began binding it, and the silence in the medical bay was not the hostile silence of the penthouse, but something else entirely, something with weight and texture, and a question sitting at the center of it that neither of them had spoken yet. Dante watched her work. He had not looked away from her face once. She cut the bandage, secured it, pressed 2 fingers against the dressing to test the hold, and then she sat back on the edge of the examination table beside him and looked at the pendant still resting against his chest and said, "How long?" Not a question. A threshold. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive quiet. She knew his evasive quiet. Knew every register of his silence by now the way you know the acoustics of a room you have lived in long enough. This was the quiet of a man lowering something he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it had weight. "The Docklands," he said. "The retreat. I found it in the rubble the next morning." She calculated that date in the back of her mind. 4 years and 3 months. "You had it on you this whole time," she said. "Every meeting, every negotiation. Every time you put 11 of your people in the field against mine." Yes. The word landed without decoration. He offered no justification for the contradiction of it, because there was no clean justification available, and she recognized that he knew this and was not going to insult her by attempting one. "Explain that to me," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked down at the pendant, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen him produce before. Stripped of every layer of the arrogance and the threat and the cold executive control she had cataloged across 4 years of watching him as an enemy. What was underneath all of it was raw in the way exposed wiring is raw, functional, live and dangerous to touch without knowing what you were doing. "You are the only thing I have ever encountered that I could not calculate," he said. "The only variable I couldn't account for. Every move you made, every boardroom, every territorial line, you were always the one thing I couldn't predict, and I am not built for things I cannot predict." He paused. "I handled it badly." "You started a war," she said. "I know." "You hospitalized my lieutenants." "I know." "You cornered me in a parking garage and told me to behave." Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face and was gone. "I know. I needed you angry at me. Angry was something I could work with. Angry kept you at a distance I could manage." He turned his head and looked at her directly, and she held the gaze, because she was not someone who looked away. The alternative was considerably worse for my operational integrity. And what was the alternative? She said, though some part of her already knew the answer and was bracing for it. Telling you, he said simply, that I have been in love with you since the Docklands, that I found your crest in the rubble and I put it on a chain because losing it felt like you losing something, and I was not able to put it back down. That every war I started with your pack was because having you as an enemy meant I got to be in the same room as you, and I did not have a more civilized way to accomplish that at the time. He stopped. Let the silence sit with what he had said. I am aware of how that reflects on my judgment. Elena looked at him for a long time. The medical bay light was harsh and without flattery, and it showed everything. The blood on his shirt, the bandaging, the way his face had been in a controlled collapse for the last 4 minutes. The dark eyes watching her with an attention so complete and so unguarded, it was almost uncomfortable to receive. This was the monster of Obsidian City's North Districts. This was the man who had put her pack to war for 18 months. This was the tyrant she had spent 4 years sharpening herself against, because having an enemy that formidable made her better, faster, more precise. This was a man who had kept her crest against his heart for 4 years and taken a bullet in the shoulder rather than let it pass through her. The ice she had constructed over a very long time had specific architecture. It had joints and load-bearing elements and carefully engineered redundancies, and she had always known exactly where each one was, because she had built every piece of it herself. She felt it now not crack, but simply cease to be necessary, the way a structure becomes unnecessary when the threat it was built against resolves. She moved. She swung her leg across him and settled onto his lap, facing him, and took his face in both hands, and his sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room before she kissed him. Not like the elevator. The elevator had been fury and proximity and champagne finding an exit. This was a decision. This was her, completely, choosing this man with the same precision and total commitment she brought to every choice that mattered, and she felt his hands come up to her waist and grip like something found after being lost. Like a man grabbing the edge of a surface after a very long fall. She pulled back a fraction of an inch. His eyes were open and on her, and the expression in them was the most undefended thing she had ever seen a person produce. "If you ever start a territorial war as a mating strategy again," she said, "I will end you." "Understood," he said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a breath. She tilted her head and found the curve where his neck met his shoulder, and she felt him go absolutely still beneath her hands, knowing what she was doing, the shifter instinct in him reading the intent before she completed it. The mating bond was old law, older than the Elder Council, older than Obsidian City, written in the blood rather than in any document. She bit down with the full deliberate force of an alpha claiming an equal, and felt the bond ignite between them like a current connecting 2 live wires, not a merger, not a surrender, but a collision of 2 massive forces that had been building toward each other for 4 years and had finally arrived at the same point in space at the same time. His arms locked around her. His aura, which she had always experienced as a wall she was pushing against, opened, and hers met it, and for one suspended moment in the medical bay of a charter yacht on the Vantara Straits, the combined force of the Northside and Southside packs occupied the same space and became something the city of Obsidian had never contended with before. His shoulder was bleeding through the bandaging slightly. She pulled back, checked it, and repacked the dressing with hands that were steady, while he sat with his arms still loosely around her, and his forehead dropped forward to rest against her temple, both of them breathing. "You need stitches," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "You should have led with the confession 4 years ago." In retrospect, he said, yes. 3 months later, the Vantara Syndicate did not exist. It had been a substantial organization once, 6 subsidiary networks, 43 operating cells, and enough foreign backing to destabilize smaller markets. It had taken Elena and Dante 11 working days to begin dismantling it after the yacht attack, and another 41 to finish the job. They had divided the work the way they had divided the yacht deck, seamlessly and without discussing the division in advance, each taking the sectors they were better positioned to access and executing, with the kind of efficiency that came from not duplicating effort. The Southside Pact's intelligence network fed data to the Northside Pact's enforcement arm. The Northside Pact's territorial reach provided cover for operations that required physical infrastructure the Southside Pact had never needed before. When the final cell collapsed, there was nothing left to collapse again. The joint corporation had been Elena's architecture, built with Dante's capital, and it occupied the top 12 floors of the new tower they had agreed on after 3 days of negotiation that looked, from the outside, very similar to the arguments about the East Wing, except that they were both smiling by the end of them, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive floor looked out over the entirety of Obsidian City. On a clear evening, you could see from the northern boundary all the way to the southern coastline, where the Vantara Straits caught the last of the light and held it. Elena stood at the glass with a glass of water and watched the city move 40 stories below, the neon and the towers, and the invisible grid of territories that she now knew better than anyone alive, because she had spent 4 years fighting over every line of it. Dante's arms came around her from behind and settled at her waist with the easy certainty of something that had always belonged there. She let him. She leaned back a fraction, barely enough to notice, which he noticed anyway. "The Westbridge Development Report," she said. "I read it," he said. "The eastern parcel needs reasoning before we can break ground." "I know. I already filed the application." She felt, rather than heard, the low sound he made that was not quite a laugh. She watched the city lights come on in the dusk, one by one, and then in clusters, and felt the weight of what they had built together sitting in her chest with a solidity that was nothing like the ice she had replaced it with. This was different. This was the weight of something that would hold. Obsidian City spread before them in the dark, and they looked at it together as they did most things now, side by side, facing the same direction, each completely certain that the person at their back was not a threat, but the most formidable ally the city had ever produced, and that the difference between an enemy and a partner sometimes came down to a single pendant on a silver chain, kept warm against the skin for 4 years, waiting for the moment it could finally be returned. If you enjoyed this Enemies to Lovers Shifter romance audiobook, please hit the like button and subscribe for more epic stories.